What Millionaires Practice in Silence by Wealthy Mindset Audiobooks. Most people believe wealth is built through louder effort, faster moves, and constant visibility, yet the ones who keep it live by a very different discipline. This book begins where success stops making noise, and where the habits that truly compound are practiced quietly, away from applause. There is a moment that often arrives quietly, without warning. It comes after the promotion, after the raise, after the long stretch of effort finally pays off in numbers that once felt unimaginable. You expect relief to follow. You expect a sense of arrival. But instead, something feels off. The calendar is fuller, the responsibilities heavier, and the mind, rather than calming down, feels louder than ever. More thoughts, more pressure, more urgency. You earned more, yet peace seems to have slipped further away. Many people experience this, though few talk about it openly. On the outside, life looks successful. On the inside, there is a subtle restlessness, a sense that you are always running, but never quite resting. Each year, you work harder, push further, and raise the bar, believing that the next milestone will finally let you exhale. And yet, that exhale never fully comes. It's a quiet frustration, the kind that doesn't explode, but slowly drains you. You begin to wonder why progress feels heavier instead of lighter. What makes this especially confusing is that nothing is obviously wrong. The numbers are improving. The career is moving forward. The goals are being checked off. And still, something feels unstable beneath the surface. You sense a gap forming between financial progress and emotional stability, but you can't quite name it. It's not failure. It's not lack of ambition. It's something subtler, a tension you carry into quiet moments, late at night, when the noise finally dies down and you're left alone with your thoughts. We grow up believing that money is supposed to calm the mind, that once the bills are covered and the future feels secure, the anxiety will fade. But for many people, the opposite happens. More money amplifies what was already there. Fear doesn't disappear. It becomes fear of losing. Urgency doesn't soften. It becomes urgency to maintain. The need to prove yourself doesn't fade. It simply finds a new audience. As Morgan Housel once observed, money amplifies who you already are. If your inner world is restless, more resources often make it louder, not quieter. This leads to a haunting question that most people never stop to ask. Why do some people earn more and feel less free, while others grow calmer as their wealth grows? Why does one person seem constantly stressed despite their success, while another moves with an almost boring steadiness, even as their financial life expands? The difference is rarely intelligence or opportunity. It is something far less visible and far more decisive. If you look closely, you begin to notice patterns. The people who appear calm are not necessarily doing less. They are reacting less. They are not chasing every signal or responding to every fluctuation. They seem slower to speak, slower to decide, slower to celebrate. From the outside, this can look like hesitation or lack of ambition, but internally, something else is happening. There is an invisible discipline at work, one that never shows up on social media and rarely makes for impressive stories. Most of what we celebrate about wealth is loud, big wins, fast growth, dramatic turns of fortune. But most of what sustains wealth is quiet. It lives in how someone thinks when no one is watching, in how they respond to boredom, uncertainty, and temptation, in how they handle the space between impulse and action. These are not skills that earn applause. They are habits practiced in silence. There is a reason this part is rarely discussed. It doesn't sell excitement. It doesn't photograph well, and it forces an uncomfortable truth that the real work of wealth has less to do with money and more to do with emotional regulation. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Self-discipline begins with the mastery of your thoughts." Few ideas are more relevant here. Without inner mastery, external success becomes a fragile thing, constantly at risk of being undermined by impatience, fear, or ego. This is where the real difference in wealth begins. Far away from spreadsheets, strategies, and income charts. It begins in the private moments when you choose not to react, when you resist the urge to turn every emotion into action, when you allow discomfort to exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. These moments feel insignificant at the time, but over years, they compound into something powerful. Most people never notice this process because it happens where no one is looking. In the decision not to chase an opportunity that feels exciting but misaligned. In the patience to wait while others rush. In the calm refusal to let short-term emotion dictate long-term direction. This discipline doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. But it quietly shapes outcomes in ways that eventually become undeniable. If you've ever felt that strange emptiness despite progress, or that growing pressure despite success, this isn't a personal failure. It's a signal, a sign that the external results have outpaced the internal structure supporting them. And the good news is that structure can be built, not through more intensity, but through deeper awareness. As this journey begins, the invitation is simple, but not easy, to look beyond what is visible, to question the assumption that more effort automatically leads to more peace, and to consider the possibility that the wealth you're seeking may depend less on what you accumulate and more on what you practice quietly, consistently, and out of sight. We grow up absorbing a very specific picture of how wealth is made. It is loud, fast, and visibly intense. We see stories of overnight success, relentless hustle, and people who seem to be always moving, always winning, always doing more than everyone else. Action is praised, speed is rewarded, and rest is often framed as weakness or laziness. Over time, this creates an unspoken belief that if you are not constantly pushing, you must be falling behind. Yet when you look closely at those who build wealth that lasts, not flashes of success, but stability that endures across decades, the pattern begins to change. Their lives are not defined by frantic motion. They move deliberately, sometimes slowly, and often with long pauses between decisions. Instead of intensity, you notice restraint. Instead of constant reaction, you see patience. What appears on the surface as calm is actually the result of deep emotional control. This contrast can be unsettling at first. We are conditioned to believe that effort must always be visible to be effective. If something feels easy or quiet, we assume it cannot be meaningful. But lasting wealth tends to grow in the background, away from attention. It is built during long stretches where nothing dramatic seems to happen, when discipline replaces excitement and consistency replaces urgency. Think of it like watching a tree grow. In its early years, most of its energy goes into developing roots. There is little to admire above ground, and progress appears slow. But those roots determine everything that comes later: how tall it can grow, how stable it will be, and how it survives storms. Wealth follows the same principle. The visible outcomes are only possible because of invisible preparation. Most people, however, are drawn to the opposite approach. They chase louder wins because noise feels like progress. A busy calendar feels productive. Rapid decisions feel powerful. There is a subtle comfort in motion, even when that motion is unfocused. It gives the illusion of control, the feeling that you are doing something important, even if the results are inconsistent. Quietly wealthy individuals tend to do the reverse. They reduce inner noise before seeking outer expansion. They simplify decisions instead of multiplying them. They are selective about where they place their energy, and they do not feel compelled to respond to every opportunity or fluctuation. This is not because they lack ambition, but because their ambition is disciplined. One of the most common traps in modern life is mistaking movement for progress and urgency for importance. Just because something demands immediate attention does not mean it deserves it. Just because everyone is reacting does not mean reacting is wise. James Clear once wrote that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Quiet wealth is built by systems that filter emotion, slow reaction, and protect long-term thinking. From the outside, this discipline can look boring. There are fewer dramatic moves, fewer emotional swings, fewer stories worth retelling at dinner parties. But on the inside, there is clarity. Decisions feel lighter because they are not rushed. Risks are measured rather than impulsive. Time becomes an ally instead of an enemy. What appears uneventful is actually highly intentional. This inner posture, the way someone relates to time, emotion, and uncertainty, shapes everything that follows. When urgency no longer drives decisions, mistakes decrease. When patience becomes habitual, opportunities are evaluated more clearly. When stillness is comfortable, boredom no longer leads to self-sabotage. These shifts may feel small in the moment, but they compound quietly, much like interest. It is also important to recognize that restraint is not the absence of action. It is the ability to act only when action is truly aligned. Quietly wealthy individuals still take risks, but they do so with preparation rather than impulse. They still work hard, but their effort is focused rather than scattered. Their calm is not passive, it is trained. This is where many people misunderstand the nature of wealth building. They assume success comes from doing more, faster. In reality, it often comes from doing less, better. From choosing quality over quantity, alignment over acceleration. From trusting that not every opportunity needs to be seized, and not every moment needs to be optimized. Over time, this approach creates a noticeable difference, not just financially, but emotionally. Stress decreases as decisions become simpler. Confidence grows because actions are consistent with values. Progress feels steadier, even if it appears slower. And perhaps most importantly, peace is no longer postponed for some future milestone. It becomes part of the process. This difference in inner posture, between constant urgency and disciplined stillness, sets the stage for everything that follows. It determines how you handle risk, how you respond to uncertainty, and how you experience success when it arrives. Before wealth shows up in numbers, it shows up in habits of thought and emotional discipline. And once those foundations are in place, growth becomes not just possible, but sustainable. As we move forward, the question is no longer how fast you can move, but how steadily you can think. Because what ultimately separates fleeting success from lasting wealth is not intensity, but alignment. And alignment begins quietly, long before anyone else notices. At a certain point, those who build lasting wealth learn a counterintuitive skill. They become comfortable sitting with uncertainty, not tolerating it reluctantly, not distracting themselves from it, but actually staying present with it. While others rush to resolve discomfort through quick decisions, impulsive purchases, or dramatic moves, they pause. They recognize that uncertainty is not a threat to be eliminated immediately, but a condition of all meaningful progress. The future, after all, has never offered guarantees, only probabilities. This ability to wait without anxiety changes everything. Emotional control does not arrive as a single breakthrough. It forms slowly through repeated moments of restraint. Each time someone resists the urge to react, they preserve clarity. Each time they let an uncomfortable feeling pass without turning it into action, they strengthen judgment. Over time, decisions become cleaner, not because the world is simpler, but because emotion no longer clouds perception. And with cleaner decisions come fewer regrets, which is a quiet form of wealth most people underestimate. Consider how often regret is born from urgency, a rushed investment made to avoid missing out, a career move taken to escape boredom, a purchase made to soothe stress rather than serve a need. These decisions feel relieving in the moment, but costly in hindsight. Wealthy individuals tend to accumulate fewer of these moments, not because they are smarter, but because they are steadier. They understand that relief is not the same as progress. What appears insignificant at first, pausing before acting, choosing not to engage, letting an opportunity pass, begins to compound. Small moments of restraint stack quietly, like interest. Confidence grows, not from winning constantly, but from trusting your ability to wait. Clarity deepens, because your mind is no longer pulled in every direction. Over years, this creates an inner stability that makes long-term thinking natural rather than forced. You can often spot this difference in how people respond to noise. When markets fluctuate, headlines shout, or trends explode overnight, most people feel compelled to move. They interpret action as intelligence. But those who build enduring wealth behave differently. Where others react, they pause. Where others chase, they observe. They are not indifferent. They are discerning. They understand that attention is a limited resource, and they protect it carefully. This quiet shift changes how time itself is experienced. For many, time feels like pressure, something constantly slipping away, demanding immediate use. For the disciplined, time becomes leverage. Waiting is no longer wasted, it is strategic. Risk is no longer something to escape, but something to measure. Opportunities are evaluated not by how exciting they feel, but by how well they align with a longer arc. Seneca once wrote, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." The same applies to decision-making. When you chase everything, nothing compounds. Wealthy individuals simplify their field of focus. By saying no more often, they create space for the few yeses that truly matter. This restraint is not driven by fear of loss, but by respect for coherence. They want their actions to make sense together over time. As this discipline deepens, something subtle but powerful happens. Discipline stops feeling like effort and starts becoming identity. Instead of asking, "Should I be patient?" the patient response arises naturally. Instead of forcing restraint, restraint becomes the default. This is the difference between motivation and character. Motivation fluctuates. Identity stabilizes. When discipline becomes identity, wealth is no longer something you chase anxiously. It becomes something you build methodically. The focus shifts from outcomes to processes, from wins to consistency. Money becomes less emotional because decisions are anchored in values rather than moods. The mind grows quieter, not because life is easier, but because internal reactions are no longer in control. This is also why quietly wealthy people often seem unhurried, even when managing significant responsibilities. They are not calm because nothing is at stake. They are calm because they trust their systems. They know that not every moment requires action, and not every emotion deserves obedience. This trust frees cognitive energy for what truly matters. Perhaps the most important realization at this stage is that wealth does not respond well to chasing. The harder it is pursued through urgency, the more elusive it becomes. But when built through alignment between emotion, discipline, and time, it grows almost as a side effect. What was once a distant goal becomes an inevitable outcome of consistent behavior. From here, the path forward feels less frantic and more grounded. You are no longer trying to outrun uncertainty. You are learning to walk alongside it. You are no longer reacting to every signal. You are listening for the few that matter. And in that shift, wealth begins to change its meaning from something you hope to reach someday into something you are steadily, quietly constructing. We live in a financial world that rewards visibility. The loudest voices get the most attention. The fastest reactions are often mistaken for intelligence. Markets move by the minute, notifications arrive by the second, and opinions form before facts have time to settle. Engagement is praised, urgency is normalized, and stillness is quietly discouraged. In this environment, doing something, anything, feels safer than doing nothing. It's no surprise, then, that emotion pulls the mind toward quick action. When prices rise, excitement whispers that you must act now. When prices fall, fear urges you to escape before it's too late. Even outside investing, this pattern repeats itself. A sudden career opportunity appears, and anxiety pushes you to say yes before thinking it through. A moment of boredom leads to unnecessary spending, simply to feel movement again. Logic may suggest patience, but emotion wants relief, and relief wants it immediately. Many of the most painful financial mistakes are not caused by a lack of knowledge. They are caused by discomfort with waiting. Waiting feels like vulnerability. It forces you to sit with uncertainty, doubt, and the possibility of being wrong. Action, even reckless action, provides a temporary sense of control. It gives the illusion that you are steering the ship, when in reality you may be reacting to the waves rather than navigating the course. This is where a deep contradiction begins to reveal itself. In a world obsessed with action, doing nothing is often the hardest move. It feels counterproductive, even irresponsible. Yet, time and again, history shows that restraint protects judgment. The investor who waits while others panic. The entrepreneur who resists expanding too quickly despite pressure. The professional who pauses before changing direction simply because everyone else seems to be moving. These moments rarely look impressive in real time, but they shape outcomes years later. Calm thinking often feels unproductive because it lacks visible output. There is no immediate result, no confirmation, no applause. You are simply thinking, observing, and choosing not to act. But beneath that quiet surface, something important is happening. Your perspective widens. Emotional noise fades. Decisions are evaluated in context rather than isolation. Long-term judgment is preserved because it has not been hijacked by short-term emotion. This is why wealth tends to grow when emotion is acknowledged but not obeyed. Emotion is not the enemy. Fear, excitement, and urgency all carry information. They signal risk, opportunity, and desire. The problem arises when emotion becomes the decision maker rather than the messenger. Quietly wealthy individuals learn to listen without surrendering control. They notice what they feel, but they do not let feeling dictate action. Think about how often regret follows decisions made in haste. A rushed investment driven by fear of missing out. A business partnership entered because of excitement rather than alignment. A financial commitment made to impress rather than to serve a long-term plan. These decisions often feel justified in the moment because emotion makes them feel urgent. But urgency is not wisdom. It is simply pressure. The discipline to pause creates a powerful advantage. When you do not need immediate resolution, you gain clarity. When you are not rushing to eliminate discomfort, you can evaluate reality more accurately. Over time, this ability compounds. Fewer impulsive mistakes mean fewer recoveries are needed. Fewer emotional swings mean more consistent progress. Stability becomes an asset rather than a byproduct. There is a quiet confidence that develops when you trust your ability to wait. You no longer feel compelled to participate in every opportunity. You stop measuring success by how busy you appear. Instead, you begin to value coherence, how well your actions make sense together over time. This coherence is difficult to explain, but easy to recognize. It feels like alignment between thought and action. In practical terms, this shift changes the central question you ask yourself. Instead of constantly wondering what to do next, you begin asking when not to act. When is patience more valuable than speed? When does restraint protect more than action could produce? When does silence offer more clarity than engagement? These questions are rarely encouraged, but they are essential to long-term wealth. This way of thinking does not eliminate risk. It reframes it. Risk becomes something to assess, not something to flee or chase. Time becomes a partner rather than a threat. You begin to understand that many outcomes improve simply by giving them space. Markets settle. Trends clarify. Emotions cool. And when action is finally taken, it is grounded rather than reactive. Perhaps the most difficult part of this discipline is that it offers no immediate reward. No one congratulates you for not acting. No metric tracks the opportunities you wisely declined. Yet these invisible decisions shape your future more than the visible ones ever could. They protect your capital, your confidence, and your clarity. As this perspective takes root, you may notice a subtle shift in how you experience the world. Less urgency, fewer emotional spikes, more trust in process. You are no longer chasing certainty. You are building resilience. And that resilience, quiet, patient, and often unnoticed, becomes one of the strongest foundations wealth can stand on. From here, the journey deepens. Because once you learn when not to act, you begin to see how much power exists in restraint. And with that understanding, a new relationship with success, risk, and time starts to unfold. One that values calm judgment over constant motion. One of the most persistent illusions about success is the belief that it must always feel exciting. We imagine progress as something energetic and visible. New deals, bold moves, constant momentum. If things feel calm, we worry we are stalling. If days feel ordinary, we assume we are falling behind. This mindset quietly convinces us that intensity is proof of purpose and that stillness is a sign of weakness. Over time, this illusion pushes people into patterns that look productive but quietly drain them. In finance, it shows up as overtrading, constantly buying and selling, reacting to every piece of news, chasing the next opportunity because standing still feels uncomfortable. In business, it becomes overexpansion, adding more projects, more partnerships, more complexity before the foundation is ready. The activity feels impressive, but the cost is hidden in the background. That cost is emotional exhaustion. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates quietly. Income rises, yet anxiety follows it upward. Decisions carry more weight. Mistakes feel more personal. The mind rarely rests because there is always something to monitor, optimize, or defend. Success, instead of creating freedom, creates vigilance. You are no longer building a life. You are maintaining a performance. Many people are surprised by this stage. They look around and wonder why they feel tense despite doing well. From the outside, everything seems fine. From the inside, the mind is crowded. Thoughts loop endlessly. What if this stops working? What if I miss the next big thing? What if this isn't enough? The busier life becomes, the less space there is to actually experience it. This is the emotional tax of pursuing wealth loudly. Every visible gain demands ongoing attention. Every expansion increases the surface area for worry. Every fast decision creates the need for faster corrections. What once felt thrilling now feels fragile. The mind is constantly paying for the lifestyle with stress, even if the bank account says otherwise. It's important to understand that nothing has gone wrong here. This is simply what happens when intensity becomes the strategy. Intensity cannot be sustained without cost. It borrows energy from the future. It requires constant stimulation to maintain momentum. And eventually, it leaves very little room for clarity. Silence, in contrast, begins to feel like stability, but only after you allow yourself to experience it. At first, silence can feel unsettling. Without constant movement, emotions surface. Doubts become audible. You notice how often action was used to avoid discomfort rather than create value. But if you stay with it, something shifts. The nervous system calms. The mind organizes itself. Decisions become fewer but stronger. Quiet wealth does not demand constant emotional payment. It does not need daily reassurance. It is built on systems that can operate without supervision, on habits that do not require constant motivation, on choices that make sense even when no one is watching. This kind of wealth feels less exciting in the moment, but far more stable over time. There is a revealing contrast between people who chase success and those who build it. Chasers often feel compelled to prove momentum to themselves and to others. Builders are comfortable letting progress unfold invisibly. Chasers feel uneasy during calm periods. Builders recognize calm as a signal that systems are working. The difference is not ambition, but relationship to intensity. As this realization settles in, the listener may begin to sense something important. Perhaps less intensity does not mean less progress. Perhaps control comes not from doing more, but from needing less stimulation to feel secure. This is not about withdrawing from opportunity, but about choosing which opportunities deserve your energy. A quieter approach creates space for judgment. When you are no longer reacting to everything, you can see patterns more clearly. When your mind is not constantly busy, insight has room to surface. You begin to notice that many urgent opportunities resolve themselves without your involvement. Trends peak and fade. Markets overcorrect. Situations clarify with time. This perspective changes how success feels internally. Instead of riding emotional highs and lows, you experience steadier confidence. Instead of constantly monitoring outcomes, you trust the process you've built. Progress may feel slower, but it also feels more certain. And certainty, unlike excitement, does not demand constant attention. What emerges is a new definition of control. Control is no longer about staying on top of everything. It is about designing a life and financial system that does not require you to be on edge. It is about knowing that silence does not mean stagnation. It often means alignment. This is not an argument against growth or ambition. It is an invitation to examine the cost of how growth is pursued. When wealth is built loudly, it asks for ongoing emotional labor. When it is built quietly, it returns energy rather than consuming it. One path creates motion, the other creates momentum. As you begin to sense that less intensity may lead to more control, a new possibility opens. You realize that stability can be chosen, not postponed, that calm can coexist with progress, and that the most powerful form of wealth may be the one that allows you to breathe easily while it grows, slowly, quietly, subtly, and with far less effort than you were taught to believe was necessary. There is a subtle moment most people overlook, yet it changes everything once it is noticed. It is the moment between feeling something and doing something. A brief pause where nothing happens outwardly, but clarity quietly has a chance to arrive. Awareness lives in that pause. And once you learn to recognize it, you begin to realize how much of life and money is shaped not by what happens to you, but by how quickly you react to it. Most impulses are not wrong, they are simply loud. Fear speaks urgently. Excitement shouts. Doubt repeats itself until it feels convincing. When you are unaware, these emotions move straight into action. You buy, sell, quit, commit, or chase without fully understanding why. But awareness interrupts that automatic loop. It creates a small gap between impulse and action. And inside that gap, better decisions begin to form almost on their own. This is not about suppressing emotion or pretending it doesn't exist. In fact, the opposite is true. As awareness grows, you start to see emotion more clearly. You notice fear without immediately escaping it. You feel excitement without letting it drive the steering wheel. Emotion becomes information, useful data about your inner state, rather than a command that must be obeyed. This single shift reduces countless mistakes before they ever happen. Think of a moment when you felt pressured to act quickly. Maybe a sudden opportunity appeared, or a market moved sharply, or someone else's success triggered comparison. The impulse was strong. The urge to respond immediately felt almost physical. Awareness doesn't remove that sensation, but it changes your relationship to it. Instead of asking, "What should I do right now?" you begin to ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" The quality of the answer improves instantly. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. Short-term motivation, the kind that depends on excitement or fear, begins to lose its grip. You stop needing emotional fuel to behave wisely. Decisions become less about mood and more about alignment. You don't act because you feel inspired today or anxious tomorrow. You act because the behavior fits who you are becoming over the long arc of your life. This is where long-term identity quietly replaces short-term motivation. You no longer need to hype yourself into discipline. Patience becomes part of your character. Consistency becomes natural rather than forced. You begin to see yourself as someone who thinks in years instead of days, in systems instead of moments. When identity shifts, behavior follows without resistance. As this internal order takes shape, something interesting happens on the outside. External results begin to mirror internal structure. Finances stabilize because decisions are no longer erratic. Progress becomes steadier because energy is no longer wasted on constant correction. Relationships improve because reactions soften. Even setbacks feel different, not as threats to your worth, but as feedback you can use. At this stage, wealth starts to change meaning. It no longer feels like a finish line you are racing toward. It becomes a byproduct, something that emerges naturally from aligned behavior repeated over time. You're not chasing money with urgency. You're building a life that money fits into. The focus shifts from outcomes to process, from wins to coherence. This is why some people appear calm even as their responsibilities grow. Their confidence does not come from believing everything will work out perfectly. It comes from trusting how they will respond if it doesn't. They have practiced awareness long enough to know that impulses will arise, emotions will fluctuate, and uncertainty will remain. What has changed is their ability to meet those moments without being controlled by them. A quieter confidence begins to form here. It is not the confidence of bravado or prediction. It is the confidence of self-regulation. You know you don't need to react immediately to feel safe. You trust your capacity to pause. And that trust reduces internal noise more than any external success ever could. This confidence feels different in the body. Less tension in decisions, less urgency in conversations, less need to prove progress. You become comfortable letting results unfold without monitoring them constantly. Silence no longer feels like stagnation. It feels like space, and in that space, insight has room to appear. Perhaps the most powerful part of this transformation is how ordinary it feels. There is no dramatic turning point, no single moment of arrival, just a gradual easing of pressure as awareness becomes habit. Over time, you realize you are spending less energy managing emotions and more energy building something meaningful. This is the foundation that quietly supports everything else. Without it, strategies collapse under pressure. With it, even imperfect plans hold together. Awareness does not eliminate risk, but it prevents panic. It does not guarantee success, but it makes success sustainable. As this section closes, notice what has shifted. Not your circumstances, but your posture toward them. You are no longer rushing toward certainty. You are building steadiness. And from that steadiness, a different kind of wealth begins to grow, one that feels less loud, less fragile, and far more aligned with the life you actually want to live. There is a quiet truth that rarely gets celebrated, yet it shapes the lives of those who build something lasting. Wisdom does not usually arrive in moments of triumph. It emerges in pauses, in stillness, in stretches where nothing obvious seems to be happening. While success can be loud and intoxicating, silence has a way of revealing what success often hides. It strips away validation and leaves you alone with your thoughts, your fears, and your values. For many people, this realization comes only after they achieve something they once wanted badly. The promotion arrives, the business grows, the income increases, and yet the internal state remains unchanged, or sometimes becomes more turbulent. External achievement, they discover, is a poor substitute for internal peace. It can distract for a while, but it cannot regulate emotion or create clarity on its own. This is where a different understanding of strength begins to form. Strength is no longer defined by how quickly you move or how decisively you act in public. It shows itself in restraint. Like an experienced investor who sits quietly while markets shout conflicting signals, wisdom often looks like waiting. Not because nothing could be done, but because doing nothing is the better option. In that waiting, unnecessary mistakes are avoided, and perspective has time to widen. Noise has a way of distorting judgment. When everyone is reacting, reacting feels safe. When urgency dominates the environment, calm can feel irresponsible. But wisdom recognizes that most noise is temporary. Trends reverse. Opinions fade. Emotions cool. Those who have trained themselves to wait gain access to information others miss, not because they are smarter, but because they are not distracted. Letting go of urgency is one of the most difficult disciplines to develop. Urgency feels productive. It gives the sensation of control, the belief that you are actively shaping outcomes. But urgency also narrows perception. It reduces complex situations into binary choices. Act now or lose. Move fast or fall behind. When urgency loosens its grip, something unexpected happens. Space opens. And in that space, clarity begins to form. Clarity does not shout. It arrives quietly, often after emotion has settled. When you are no longer rushing to resolve discomfort, you can see situations for what they are rather than what you fear they might become. You notice subtleties. You weigh trade-offs. You recognize when patience will improve the outcome more than effort ever could. This is not passive living. It is deliberate restraint. There is a paradox here that many people resist at first. Calm often attracts better outcomes, not because calm itself creates opportunity, but because it allows you to recognize and act on the right ones. When your internal state is steady, you are not pulled toward every possibility. You are selective. You wait for alignment. And when you do move, your action carries more weight because it is not diluted by constant reaction. This paradox becomes especially clear in financial life. Those who are perpetually anxious tend to overcorrect. They buy too late, sell too early, and change direction frequently. Their decisions are shaped by emotion rather than probability. In contrast, those who remain calm during uncertainty are able to hold positions longer, think in broader time frames, and let compounding do its work. Calm does not eliminate risk, but it prevents panic from becoming policy. Less reaction leads to more control, not over outcomes, but over yourself. And self-control is the only form of control that truly lasts. When you are no longer at the mercy of every emotional swing, your decisions become more consistent. Consistency builds trust. Trust reduces stress. Stress reduction improves judgment. Over time, this cycle reinforces itself quietly, without the need for constant effort. As this way of living settles in, the listener may notice a subtle shift in how time feels. There is less rushing, less pressure to fill every moment with productivity. Silence becomes less threatening. It no longer signals stagnation. It signals stability. You begin to understand that nothing important needs to happen every day for progress to continue. This steadiness changes how success is experienced. Wins are appreciated but not clung to. Losses are acknowledged but not personalized. External circumstances fluctuate, but internal posture remains relatively stable. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes navigable. Challenges are met with curiosity instead of panic. Decisions are made with context rather than haste. There is also a quiet dignity in this approach. You stop needing to announce progress. You stop measuring yourself against noise. You trust that what you are building does not require constant validation. This trust is deeply calming. It frees mental energy for creativity, for presence, for long-term thinking. And that energy, once reclaimed, becomes one of your most valuable assets. Perhaps the greatest reward of all is how this calm begins to shape identity. You start to see yourself as someone who is not easily shaken, someone who can wait, someone who does not confuse urgency with importance. This identity reinforces the behavior, and the behavior reinforces the outcomes. Wealth, peace, and clarity begin to support one another rather than compete. As this section comes to a close, notice how different the pace feels. Not slower in a limiting way, but steadier in a sustaining one. You are no longer being pulled forward by anxiety or pushed by pressure. You are moving deliberately with intention. And in that steadiness, wisdom continues to grow, not through success alone, but through the quiet strength of restraint. As the ideas begin to settle, a single understanding starts to take shape beneath them all. What once felt like separate lessons about patience, restraint, awareness, and calm now reveal themselves as parts of the same inner structure. You begin to see that wealth, in its most durable form, is not built by isolated tactics, but by coherence inside the person building it. When the inner world is ordered, the outer world tends to follow. Earlier, there may have been a quiet tension between effort and peace. You were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that effort requires struggle, that ambition demands pressure, and that calm must be postponed until success is secured. But now, the tension begins to dissolve. You realize that effort does not have to feel frantic to be effective. Peace does not have to be earned as a reward at the end. The two can coexist when effort is guided by clarity rather than anxiety. This is where wealth starts to look less like a destination and more like a mirror. It reflects the internal coherence of the person managing it. When thoughts are scattered, finances often feel scattered. When emotions dominate decisions, money tends to behave unpredictably. But when inner systems are aligned, values, habits, time horizons, external results gain stability. The numbers stop swinging wildly because the decisions behind them no longer do. Emotion, discipline, and patience begin to work together quietly here. Emotion provides awareness, letting you sense when something feels off or misaligned. Discipline offers structure, helping you act consistently even when motivation fades. Patience stretches time, allowing small advantages to compound without interference. None of these forces need to overpower the others. When balanced, they create a rhythm that sustains progress without exhausting the person living it. Progress now feels different. It may appear slower on the surface, but it feels more certain underneath. You are no longer chasing rapid validation or dramatic leaps forward. You are building momentum that does not require constant supervision. Each step reinforces the next. Each decision fits into a longer story. And because the process feels sustainable, you are less tempted to abandon it when things become quiet or uncomfortable. There is a noticeable shift in how pressure is experienced. Where there was once a sense of urgency, there is now simplicity. Not the simplicity of doing nothing, but the simplicity of doing fewer things with greater intention. Fewer decisions, but better ones. Fewer goals, but clearer priorities. The mental clutter that once created stress begins to thin, making room for focus. This simplicity has an unexpected emotional effect. It reduces self-conflict. You are no longer pulled between competing impulses. Work harder versus rest. Act now versus wait. Chase more versus protect what you have. Choices feel cleaner because they are anchored to principles rather than moods. Life becomes less about constant negotiation with yourself and more about steady follow-through. As pressure fades, reflection naturally replaces striving. Instead of asking, "What should I push next?" you begin asking, "What is already working?" You notice patterns instead of reacting to events. You look for leverage instead of effort. Reflection is not inactivity here. It is intelligence applied calmly. It allows you to refine systems instead of reinventing them repeatedly. This reflective posture changes how setbacks are processed. Mistakes are no longer interpreted as personal failures or reasons to overcorrect. They become feedback. Information. Data points that inform future decisions without shaking your sense of direction. Because you are no longer rushing, you can afford to learn, and because you are learning, your confidence grows quietly. There is also a deeper sense of alignment that begins to emerge. Your actions feel more like expressions of who you are, not attempts to become someone else. You stop borrowing urgency from the environment. You stop comparing your pace to other people's timelines. You trust that your progress, though quieter, is built on solid ground. This trust is stabilizing in ways external validation never could be. Over time, this inner structure becomes self-reinforcing. Calm leads to better decisions. Better decisions lead to steadier results. Steadier results reinforce calm. The cycle no longer depends on constant effort or emotional highs. It runs on consistency. And consistency, when paired with time, becomes one of the most powerful forces available. What is perhaps most striking is how ordinary this life begins to feel in a good way. The drama fades, the extremes soften. Success no longer feels fragile, and failure no longer feels catastrophic. You are not numb or disengaged, you are grounded, present, capable of responding thoughtfully rather than reacting instinctively. At this point, wealth is no longer the central pursuit. It is a consequence of how you think, choose, and wait. It grows in the background while your attention shifts toward living well, thinking clearly, and protecting your internal state. And in that shift, something important becomes clear. The quieter the inner structure becomes, the stronger it tends to be. As this section closes, take a moment to notice the calm that has replaced the earlier urgency. Not a forced calm, but a natural one. The kind that comes from understanding rather than control, from alignment rather than intensity, from building something that no longer requires you to run just to keep it standing. As the noise begins to fade, you may notice something subtle happening inside you. Old frustrations resurface, but they arrive differently now. What once felt sharp and overwhelming feels distant, almost instructive. You can look back at moments of stress, impatience, or disappointment without the same emotional charge. Instead of reopening wounds, these memories offer perspective, as if they are finally being understood rather than relived. You begin to see that much of the anxiety you carried was not about money itself, but about urgency. The pressure to move faster, earn more, prove something, or catch up to an invisible standard. What once felt like motivation now reveals itself as misdirected energy. It wasn't pushing you forward as much as it was keeping you tense. Seeing this clearly does not bring regret. It brings relief. With that clarity, self-judgment starts to loosen its grip. You realize you were not broken for feeling stressed or restless. You were responding to an environment that constantly rewarded speed and punished stillness. Acceptance replaces criticism. You stop asking why you weren't calmer sooner, and instead acknowledge that awareness arrives when it is ready. This kindness toward yourself creates space for something new to emerge. Peace, you discover, does not require a larger number in your bank account. It was never waiting on the next milestone. It had been blocked by noise, urgency, and constant self-evaluation. As those layers fall away, peace begins to feel accessible now in the present moment. Not perfect or permanent, but available. A quiet baseline you can return to, regardless of circumstances. This changes how freedom is defined. Freedom is no longer about having unlimited options or endless growth. It becomes emotional steadiness, the ability to remain grounded when things fluctuate, the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, the confidence that you do not need to rush to feel secure. This kind of freedom is internal, and once experienced, it is difficult to trade for anything else. Simplicity also takes on a new meaning. What once seemed restrictive now feels supportive. Fewer commitments create more focus. Fewer distractions create more presence. You realize that complexity often masqueraded as importance, while simplicity was quietly offering stability. By letting go of excess, mental, emotional, and financial, you regain a sense of control that does not require constant effort. There is a grounding quality to this simplicity. It brings you back into your body, into your breath, into the present moment. You notice how much energy was once spent anticipating the future or replaying the past. Now attention settles more easily. The mind still thinks, but it no longer races. Thoughts pass without demanding immediate response. As this gentle calm settles in, it does not announce itself dramatically. There is no sudden shift, no declaration of arrival. Instead, it feels like a steady exhale you didn't realize you were holding. The nervous system relaxes. The internal dialogue softens. You begin to trust your pace again. Trust that you do not need to force progress for it to exist. This calm does not make you passive or disengaged. It makes you selective. You care deeply, but not desperately. You act with intention rather than impulse. When challenges arise, they are met with curiosity instead of panic. When opportunities appear, they are evaluated with patience rather than urgency. Life feels more navigable because you are no longer fighting it internally. You may notice that your relationship with money itself begins to change. It no longer carries the same emotional weight. Gains are appreciated without becoming addictive. Losses are processed without becoming personal. Money returns to its proper role as a tool, not a measure of worth or a source of constant pressure. This shift alone brings a surprising amount of peace. Perhaps the most meaningful change is how you experience yourself. There is less internal conflict, less self-negotiation, less need to prove. You feel more at home in your decisions, even when they are imperfect. You trust that you can course correct without self-criticism. This trust becomes a quiet form of confidence that does not depend on external validation. As you sit with this new perspective, you realize that nothing dramatic has changed on the outside. The world is still uncertain. Goals still exist. Challenges still arise. But something essential has shifted within you. You are no longer chasing calm as a reward. You are practicing it as a way of being. This is not the end of the journey, but it is a meaningful pause, a moment to acknowledge how far your understanding has come. The frustrations that once felt heavy now feel instructive. The urgency that once drove you now feels unnecessary. And in their place, a steady, gentle calm has begun to take root, one that will quietly support everything that comes next. As the pace continues to soften, a quiet sense of gratitude begins to emerge. Not the loud, celebratory kind that comes from achieving a milestone, but a deeper appreciation for lessons learned slowly and without spectacle. You start to see how much understanding came not from dramatic breakthroughs, but from repetition, patience, and small moments of awareness that accumulated over time. The hardest periods now appear less like detours and more like teachers that spoke in a language you were finally ready to understand. This gratitude changes how you view imperfection. What once felt like a flaw or a delay now feels like part of the design. You no longer see mistakes as evidence that you are behind, but as signals that you are learning in real time. Progress no longer requires perfection to move forward. It only requires honesty, reflection, and the willingness to continue. This realization removes an enormous weight, freeing energy that was once spent on self-criticism. With that weight lifted, something surprising becomes possible. Inner peace and ambition begin to coexist. You no longer feel the need to choose between wanting more and being content with what is. Ambition remains, but it is no longer fueled by anxiety or comparison. It is guided by curiosity, purpose, and a clear sense of direction. Peace does not dull your drive, it steadies it. The journey itself begins to feel more human than heroic. You stop framing your life as a constant battle to be won or a story that must impress others. Instead, it feels like an unfolding process, uneven at times, slow at others, but deeply personal. There is relief in letting go of the expectation that growth must look dramatic. You begin to respect the quiet days just as much as the productive ones. Silence, which once felt uncomfortable or empty, takes on a new character. It becomes a place of rest rather than avoidance. In silence, you are no longer confronted by urgency or unmet expectations. You are simply present. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer demand immediate resolution. This kind of silence feels supportive, like a steady background that allows clarity to surface naturally. In this quieter space, you may notice something important. You are no longer chasing, not chasing validation, not chasing certainty, not chasing the next version of yourself in hopes that it will finally feel enough. You still move forward, but the movement is deliberate rather than desperate. Goals exist, but they no longer define your worth or dictate your emotional state. This shift brings a subtle confidence that is difficult to articulate. It is not confidence rooted in achievement, but in self-trust. You trust your ability to wait. You trust your ability to adapt. You trust that you do not need to rush to stay relevant or successful. This trust changes how you experience time. Days feel fuller, not because more happens, but because you are actually present for them. As the chasing fades, wisdom feels closer, not as something distant to be earned, but as something already within reach. It shows up in how you pause before reacting, in how you listen more than you speak, in how you choose alignment over excitement. Wisdom stops feeling abstract and starts feeling practical, embodied in everyday choices that protect your peace. You may find yourself reflecting on how different this feels from the beginning of the journey. The early drive was fueled by urgency, comparison, and the belief that fulfillment was just one milestone away. Now, fulfillment feels less like a destination and more like a way of moving through life. You are still growing, still learning, still building, but without the constant tension that once accompanied every step. This does not mean challenges disappear. Life remains uncertain. Markets fluctuate, plans change, emotions rise and fall. But your relationship with these experiences is different. You are not as reactive, not as shaken, not as quick to interpret difficulty as failure. There is space between what happens and how you respond, and in that space, choice lives. Perhaps the most meaningful realization at this stage is how ordinary wisdom feels once it is integrated. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not announce itself. It feels like calm awareness, steady judgment, and the ability to sit comfortably with unanswered questions. You no longer need everything to be resolved to feel okay. As this reflection deepens, you sense that something fundamental has changed. You are not striving to become someone else. You are refining who you already are. The pressure to prove has softened. The need to hurry has loosened. In their place, there is a grounded presence that supports both growth and peace. Wisdom, you realize, was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be noticed. And now, as the noise fades and gratitude settles in, it feels close, quietly, shaping your choices, your pace, and the life you continue to build with intention rather than urgency. As this journey draws toward its close, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Wealth is shaped internally long before it ever appears externally. Long before numbers grow, before accounts expand, before results become visible, something quieter happens inside a person. Beliefs settle, emotional reactions soften, identity takes form. The outer world eventually reflects this inner order, but only after it has been lived privately and consistently. This is why calm is not weakness, no matter how often the world suggests otherwise. Calm is leverage. It allows you to see clearly when others are clouded by urgency. It gives you access to better decisions when pressure is high. Calm creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, intelligence has room to operate. While chaos drains energy, calm concentrates it. Many people spend years trying to overpower uncertainty with intensity. They move faster, push harder, and add more effort, believing force will create security. But over time, intensity reveals its limits. It exhausts the mind. It shortens perspective. It makes every outcome feel personal and every delay feel threatening. Calm, on the other hand, widens the horizon. It allows time to work on your behalf instead of against you. This is where alignment quietly outperforms intensity. When your values, habits, and long-term vision point in the same direction, progress becomes sustainable. You no longer need constant motivation to stay on track. You no longer rely on emotional highs to move forward. Alignment reduces friction, and reduced friction allows momentum to build naturally. Over time, this momentum becomes more powerful than any short burst of effort ever could. Perhaps the most profound realization is also the simplest. Nothing was missing. There was no secret skill withheld from you, no final breakthrough you failed to discover. What felt absent was understanding. You were taught to chase outcomes before mastering your internal state. You were encouraged to focus on results before stabilizing the process that produces them. Once this misunderstanding clears, everything begins to make sense. This is why wealth grows quieter as it grows stronger. Early success often announces itself loudly, demanding attention and validation. Mature wealth does the opposite. It requires less explanation, less defense, less emotional involvement. It becomes sturdy rather than flashy. It compounds in silence, protected by patience and reinforced by consistency. The absence of drama is not a lack of progress. It is evidence of stability. At this stage, the mind reveals itself as the primary asset, not knowledge alone, but judgment. Not ambition alone, but emotional regulation. Your ability to think clearly under pressure, to wait when others rush, to act deliberately rather than impulsively. These are the qualities that sustain wealth over time. Money responds to how you manage uncertainty far more than how you chase opportunity. When the mind becomes steady, decisions simplify. You stop needing to react to everything. You stop confusing movement with meaning. You stop measuring success by speed alone. Instead, you begin to value coherence. How well today's choices align with tomorrow's life. This coherence becomes a quiet source of confidence. one that does not depend on constant wins to remain intact. Lasting wealth grows where patience lives. Patience is not passive waiting or avoidance. It is active trust in process. It is the willingness to allow good decisions time to compound without interference. It is the discipline to stay aligned even when progress feels slow. Patience protects you from unnecessary risk and from the emotional exhaustion that comes from trying to force outcomes before they are ready. Over time, this patience reshapes how you experience success itself. Success becomes less about arrival and more about stability, less about peaks and more about consistency. You begin to measure progress not only by what you gain, but by what you no longer lose: clarity, peace, energy, focus. These invisible gains often matter more than the visible ones. This understanding also changes how you relate to the future. The future no longer feels like something you must outrun or control aggressively. It becomes something you are steadily preparing for. You trust that if your internal structure remains sound, you will adapt to whatever arrives. This trust reduces anxiety more effectively than any amount of planning ever could. As you reflect on the path behind you, it becomes clear that the most important shifts were not dramatic. They were subtle: a pause before reacting, a decision not to chase, a moment of restraint when emotion demanded action. These moments rarely looked impressive at the time, but they quietly shaped everything that followed. They were the true investments. In the end, wealth is revealed not as a loud lifestyle, but as a quiet competence. The ability to think long-term in a short-term world. The strength to remain calm when others panic. The wisdom to know that peace is not a reward for success, but a foundation for it. When this foundation is in place, growth becomes not only possible, but sustainable. And perhaps that is the lasting wisdom to carry forward. Wealth does not demand that you become louder, faster, or more intense. It asks that you become clearer, steadier, and more aligned. It grows best in silence, guided by patience, protected by discipline, and shaped by a mind that understands what truly matters. As we come to the end of this reflection, I want to begin with gratitude. Gratitude for your willingness to slow down in a world that constantly urges you to speed up. Gratitude for your openness to sit with ideas that are quiet, subtle, and often overlooked. Simply choosing to listen, to reflect rather than react, is already a sign of the discipline we've been exploring together. If there is one truth worth carrying forward, it is this: wealth begins inside, not outside. Long before it shows up in accounts, assets, or achievements, it takes shape in how you think, how you wait, and how you respond under pressure. The internal world always sets the ceiling for the external one. When the mind is scattered, wealth feels fragile. When the mind is steady, wealth has room to grow. Silence, then, is not something to fear or fill. It is not emptiness or lack. Silence is strength. It is where judgment sharpens, where emotions settle, and where long-term thinking quietly forms. In silence, you are no longer pulled by every signal or demand. You are anchored, and from that anchor, clearer decisions naturally emerge. This journey does not end with a dramatic conclusion or a sudden transformation. It ends softly, the way real change often does. With a calmer pace, with fewer impulses, with a clearer sense of what truly matters and what no longer deserves your energy. The clarity may not shout, but it lingers. As you return to your life, your work, and your goals, carry this understanding gently. You do not need to rush. You do not need to prove. You only need to remain aligned. because the quiet practices you choose each day, often unseen by others, are shaping something far more durable than noise ever could. And that, perhaps, is the real wealth.